Hello and welcome to yet another session. The topic for today's session is A.K. Sen's concept of absolute and relative poverty. The introduction to the session. After studying the importance of health and education in development, we must now understand the concepts of absolute and relative poverty. While it is not easy to define poverty, in simple sense, absolute poverty is the deprivation of monetary resources to buy basic necessities of survival, and relative poverty is the inequality in income distribution between different percentile groups of population. However, income is not the only criterion for defining absolute and relative poverty. According to UNDP, poverty is a multi-dimensional issue requiring a wide range of measures. Amartya Sen gave a more intriguing understanding of poverty. Let us now look at the objectives of the session that we see today. The first and the foremost is to delve into the understanding of poverty as given by A.K. Sen. The second is to understand the meaning of entitlements. The third, to know how lack of entitlements are at the root of the issue of poverty. The fourth, to comprehend Sen's idea regarding absolute and relative poverty. And the fifth one, to grasp the concept of poverty measurement in Sen's writings. In his work Poverty and Famines, an essay on entitlement and deprivation in the year 1981, Sen explains that people starve, the ones who do not have basic necessities, because they do not have ownership claims over things which can be exchanged for food or are worthy of exchange in a market situation. Now, what is ownership of exchangeable things is one type of entitlement. Now, let us see what is ownership relation. It is the legitimate right over things which entitles a person to use those to buy necessities for herself. The ownership of land is an entitlement to use the resources on land to produce something and sell in exchange of food. The right to inherit is a claim on the ownership of assets which are inherited and which can buy necessities. Legitimate ownership is one which is accepted by any society. The society accepts a person's right over a resource which she exchanges for, say, food. Thus, according to Sen, ownership relations are one type of entitlement relations, and in a market economy, entitlements include the following. The first and the foremost, trade-based entitlement. One is entitled to own what one obtains from trading something one owns with a willing party or parties. The second is the production-based entitlement. One is entitled to own what one gets by undertaking the activity of trade. The third, own labor entitlement. One is entitled to one's own labor power and thus can trade labor or produce tradable goods with own labor. The fourth one is inheritance and transfer entitlement. One is entitled to own what is willingly given to one by another who legitimately owns it. In a simple sense, one is entitled to have what is given in inheritance or in gift. Entitlement over unclaimed objects. One may find an object which is not claimed by anybody and thus comes in the ownership of one who finds it. And finally, the sixth one, government provided entitlements. One has entitlements over subsidies, coupons, money transfers which are provided by the government. If the bundle of goods or entitlements which a person has is accepted in the market system, one can buy necessities and will not be poor. However, if one does not have enough goods, or if goods which one has are not acceptable in the market for exchange, then one is deprived of the opportunity to buy necessities and hence remains poor. The exchange worthiness of entitlements. Poverty arises when the entitlements owned by some individuals are not accepted in the market for exchange or are exchanged for very little value. For example, the labor of an unskilled worker is not exchanged for a value or wage enough to buy him his basic requirements, while the owner of a land can produce one's own food if need arises. Besides, when the price of goods rise in the market, the purchasing power of money wage falls, and hence a farm labourer's entitlement, which is the money wage, falls short in fulfilling his basic needs, while a sharecropper on the land will have claim over some portion of crops. Hence, in the study of poverty, it is important to look at the ownership pattern as well as the exchange entitlements. Many times, in developed countries, people do not starve in famines, not because they are rich, but because the social security arrangements give them entitlement to buy food. In other words, social security arrangements help them to hold on for a longer period of time during famines or in a situation of unemployment. Now let us look at the supply side. On the supply side of essential goods, the arrangement of production and distribution are both equally important. We will now look at the definitions of poverty. Sen confirms 3 types of poverty given by Rain in 1971. That is, the first one, subsistence, the second one, inequality, and the third one being the externality. According to Sen, the first focus of poverty should be on the question who, and the answer is those whose consumption falls short of the norms defined by the poverty line are the poor. The second question he asks is, if poverty concerns only the poor, number 1, number 2, the non-poor, or the third, the poor and the non-poor both. The notion of absolute poverty is thus given by the number of people who cannot meet their subsistence needs, defined by the poverty line. The notion of relative poverty is certainly about the inequality in the distribution of entitlements among different percentile groups of the population. Sen uses 2 statements to explain these 2 notions of poverty. The first one is, there is less deprivation in community A than in community B in terms of some common standard. Example, the notions of minimum needs prevailing in community A. And the second one, there is more deprivation in community A than in community B in terms of their respective standards of minimum needs, which are a good deal higher in A than in B. The first statement relates to absolute poverty and the second to relative poverty. The externalities of poverty pertain to the extremely poor, who become offenders owing to poverty and hence hurt the society. Hence, the society must not let anybody become so poor, and hence poverty should concern the poor as well as the non-poor. What are the measures of poverty? While measuring poverty, the direct method or the income method may be used. In the direct method, an aggregate number of people consumption basket leaves some basic needs are unsatisfied is obtainable. In the income method, the basic needs are identified. The amount of money needed to buy the basic needs is calculated. This income required to buy bare necessities of life is called poverty line, and the people with incomes lesser than this are called poor. The direct method is a better measure as it does not alter with the purchasing power of income. According to the income method, when the necessities get costlier, the number of people below the poverty line will increase and the already poor will get poorer. However, in both the methods, it may become a challenge to put constraints on tastes. Bare minimum needs may be defined as the various levels of tastes. Putting severe taste restrictions in the income method would mean adopting a cost minimizing poverty line. If a rich person decides to fast until death, then by a generalized direct method, this person will fall in the category of poor. However, in such a case, the income method proves superior as it measures a person's ability to meet basic needs. The income method is not merely a rough aid to measure a person's actual consumption, but it is a measure of ability to buy consumption goods. The income method proves superior when a measure of actual numerical distance away from poverty line is to be obtained. On the other hand, the income method becomes unrealistic when consumption patterns are not uniform. When different social groups or people from different regions in the same country have non-uniform consumption patterns, a poverty line cannot be realistically identified. For example, if some social groups are pure vegetarian and some are non-vegetarian, while few are vegans, then the cost of minimum requirements will differ as the prices of goods under each category of consumption will differ. When a poverty line is drawn at some income requirement per person to fulfill basic needs, it becomes arbitrary in the sense that it does not differentiate the difference in requirements for different age groups. The food requirement for children, youth and adults are different. A common income line will not consider such differences. While using the income method, the use of relative poverty emerges when one tries to choose from the following three approaches of the income method. The first one being put the same weight on each household irrespective of the size. The second is to put the same weight on each person irrespective of the size of the family to whom they belong, and the third is to put a weight on each family equal to the number of equivalent adults in it. We will now understand Sen's critique to the standard measures of poverty. The first one is the head count index. This is a widely used measure of poverty and was the head count index H. It is given by the proportion of people who is identified as poor. If Q number of people who are poor and N stands for the total number of population, then H is equal to Q divided by N. Sen considers that it is important to measure the distance of people from the poverty line. It is important to assess the number of people just below the poverty line or those who are way below the poverty line. The head count index is insensitive to this. The second is the poverty gap, which is the income gap ratio. The poverty gap is the aggregate shortfall of income of all the poor from the specified poverty line. The index can be expressed as the percentage shortfall of the average income of the poor from the poverty line. This measure is denoted by I and is called the income gap ratio. Sen points out that the income gap ratio, which is denoted as I, is completely insensitive to transfers of income among the poor so long as nobody crosses the poverty line by such transfers. If any policy transfers some money from individual A to individual B, then both are below the poverty line, but A is more away from the poverty line than B. The money transfers from A to B is a regressive and it renders A more poor than before. I does in a way ignore the number of people below the poverty line. Sen rejects both these measures of poverty. What is Sen's relative deprivation axiom? Let us now understand that. Sen suggested that if all poor, that is, all those who are below the poverty line, are ranked in an order where higher rank means more poor and the measure of absolute poverty also captures relative poverty. In other words, a poverty measure capturing this aspect of relative deprivation must make the weight of a person's income shortfall increases with his rank, which is in correlation to I. This is the axiom of ranked relative deprivation, which is axiom R, and it focuses on the distribution of income among the poor. Sen's normalized deprivation axiom. In the words of Sen, stated in 1981, it is understood that H catches one aspect of overall deprivation, that is how many, never mind how much, while I catches another aspect of it, that is how much on the average, never mind suffered by how many. In the special case where all poor have the same income, that is H and I together may give us a fairly good idea of the extent of poverty in terms of overall deprivation. Since the problem of relative distribution among the poor does not arise in this special case, we may settle for a measure that boils down at some function of only H and understand these circumstances. A simple representation of this leading to a convenient normalization is the product HI. This may be called as the axiom of normalized absolute deprivation, which is axiom A. Now let us understand what is precise axiomatic measure of poverty. Using the relative and normalized deprivation approaches, Sen gives the precise axiom of poverty as in the equation given on the screen. P is equal to H, which is multiplied by I plus a sum total of 1 minus I multiplied by G put all together, where 1 is the rank of the least poor and G is the Gini coefficient of the distribution of income among the poor. Sen and Mehboob ul Haq developed the Human Development Index, which was used in the World Development Report in 1990. We have seen this in one of our earlier lectures. It is time to understand the capability approach. According to Sen's capabilities approach, development should focus on maximizing what an individual can choose to achieve in life, such as the ability to choose the many different cultural values and practices to adopt, etc. This will ultimately affect the individual's well-being, which is defined as the actual enjoyment of the individual's choices deriving from the range of all the options available to them. Therefore, unlike utilitarianism and libertarianism, the capability and well-being approach is holistic in the sense that it looks at the range of options available for the individual to choose from the freedom to exercise that choice. In this approach, poverty is looked upon as the issue of rights and access. A nation which cannot provide certain rights and capabilities to the citizens is poor. Amartya Sen proposed that there are 5 general freedoms upon which capabilities lay, and the denial of these will give rise to deprivation or poverty. The first is political freedom, including civil rights. The second is economic facilities, which includes access to credit. The third is the social opportunities, which include arrangements for access to healthcare, education and other social services. The fourth one is transparency in relations between people and between people and governments. And the fifth one is protective security, which includes social and economic safety nets such as unemployment benefits and famine and emergency relief. To sum it up, we can thus conclude poverty is not restricted to income deprivation or consumption of basic necessities. It is related to the right to live a life of dignity and have access to opportunities of various kinds. With this, we come to today's session. Thank you for joining.